Welcome to the Pro Social Workers Podcast, the place where social work meets diversity, dialogue, and ethical practice. Here we offer courses that promote viewpoint and political diversity while fostering human connection. And the best part? Our content is completely free to access. For professional social workers and interested others, we provide the option to earn continuing education credits with a simple fee after listening to our episodes. Go to prosocialworkers.com to learn more. Together, we'll explore how to truly put the social back into social work. So, tune in, get inspired, and join us on this journey towards a more inclusive and connected future.
Hello and welcome to the Pro Social Podcast. My name is Matt Watson and I'm the Executive Director of Pro Social Workers, and we are an organization that promotes viewpoint and political diversity in social work practice and pro-social efforts outside of social work. I'm joined today by my co-founder, Xander Kaig, and our senior scholar, Dr. Nafis Alam, as well as a guest, Dr. Lee Beckstead. And we recorded a podcast 2 weeks ago about the Childs versus Salazar case. It was before the U.S. Supreme Court, anticipating a decision that would be made in late spring. And to our surprise, an opinion came out 3 days after we recorded. And we created a course for that podcast and hope to continue that discussion and explore the impact of that opinion and that case in mental health practice and specifically in social work. Today we'll invite Xander, Dr. Beckstead, and Nafis to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with our discussion. Nafis, you want to take it away?
Sure. My name is Nafis, Senior Scholar with Pro Social Workers. Published almost 150 pieces so far, about 40 of them peer-reviewed, the rest popular press, and looking forward to having this discussion.
Xander, you want to introduce yourself and then introduce our guest, Lee?
Absolutely. It's good to be with you all again. Well, I'm Xander Kaig, licensed clinical social worker. I am one of the co-founders, as Matt said, of Pro Social Workers. I'm also the ASWB social work consultant for Pro Social Workers. And I'm just really looking forward to diving in. And you're right, it was a surprise that ruling came so quickly. And 8-1. I mean, that is fairly monumental in and of itself.
Xander, tell us a little bit about Lee and how you crossed paths with him.
Goodness, I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, but my recollection is that Lee reached out to me to participate in a writing project. I can't remember what was going on at the time. Maybe I was moving or I was in the throes of caregiving with my father, and so I wasn't available enough. And I think also my presence as part of the group created some tension in the group of people that had already been gathered prior to my being invited to participate. And I don't know, I probably didn't want the grief at the time because I was juggling so many different things. But we've stayed in touch, and I've been invited again, to participate in another project. And I've had Lee on my podcast, the Third Space podcast, to talk about this very issue, actually, and of like conversion therapy, because he and I have personal experiences with this as well. So we're it's not just a professional opinion that we have about this topic. And when we were talking about doing another recording, especially following the ruling, I immediately thought, we should get Lee involved. And Matt, I think, said the same thing, like we were on the same wavelength about it. And so I just want to say thank you so much, Lee, for like inviting me into your universe and then being willing to participate also in mine and ours now. So welcome, and please tell us more about you and your work.
Thank you, Xander. I so appreciate this opportunity to talk with the three of you and to share what I've been learning. I'm going to go, I think, hopefully you said I could say more about my,
Please.
Where I'm coming from.
Yeah, please.
So my name is Lee Beckstead. I'm a psychologist. I was a psychologist licensed since 2004. But I do want to share what I've been doing for the last 30 years of my professional life, and also before that, because listeners can determine and judge if my views have any merit and can be helpful, and also if you can check my biases and whatever privileged positions I do have. But as Xander mentioned, when I was a teenager, I tried to stop being gay, to not stop being attracted to men. And I used religious methods, and they failed me. And I felt that I was a failure, and I attempted suicide. I think I was probably around 16 or 17 years old. I stopped it. I took pills, and I realized I really don't want to die. I just need some help. I did go on an LDS mission. A member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Went on a mission. After I came back from my mission, I told my bishop, I had a girlfriend and a boyfriend, my first boyfriend. And I told her about him, and she told my bishop about me. And my bishop told me about conversion therapy. And this was when I was probably around 22 years old or so. And so I could have been a client of Ms. Childs if I had been Catholic. So, because I was like, yes, I want this type of therapy. I don't want to be gay. I don't want to be attracted to men. Help me resolve my distress. And so when I went to therapy, they gave me reasons for why I was sexually attracted to men. Those reasons made sense to me because, I was my distant father, because my mother was too close to me. Those were the reasons why, and because I'm too flamboyant or effeminate. So they gave me reasons for why I was attracted to men, and they gave me ways to not be that way. If I can improve my relationships with men, with my father, if I dated more with women, and if I could act more masculine. I tried those things. I tried. But going back and forth, I was failing, and then I'd be attracted to men and date and stop, and going back and forth until age 27 when I read a book called Peculiar People. It was a book about gay Mormons who were happy. I never realized people could be gay and Mormon and happy at the same time. And it was that time at age 27 that I realized I'm going to try to figure out what it means for me to be spiritual and attracted to men. Then entered into the doctoral program. And this was around 1996. I think Xander and I are the same age. In 1996, nothing was going on about conversion therapy. My advisor at the time, Sue Morrow, is a feminist qualitative researcher. I love her dearly. She said, we should study what we're most interested in. And so I was wondering if I had thrown in the towel too soon. I wonder if I really could have kept trying to stop being gay. And so I started gathering people who had said that they were benefited from conversion therapy, and those who said they were harmed by conversion therapy. And this is when it stopped. Right before or right when it became really big into the national political and advertisements about ex-gays and ex-lesbians. So I was in the right place at the right time. But instead of trying to say that it was harmful or it was beneficial, I was trying to understand how these people could say it was harmful or how they could say they were cured from these methods. So I developed a broader treatment approach that would help anybody who was struggling with these conflicts, how to help them develop self-acceptance and a positive self-identity. I think it fits with, the three of your approach about pluralism. It's that I really wanted to make space for everybody.
Right.
Because I instead of, rather than just these, the norms, I wanted the outliers are really important in qualitative research. And so that's what I built. And because of this new treatment approach, I was asked to be part of the American Psychological's task force in 2007 to determine the research and the appropriate methods for those who were wanting to change their sexual orientation. And I'm quite proud of the product that we did in 2009. I think we had ethical boundaries, and we also developed approach about really to focus on identity development, not facilitating one identity over another, this is what I appreciated from your last podcast. Right. This is not about forcing or encouraging a gay identity. It's about encouraging the person's identity development.
Wow.
So that's 2007. I know this is a long history, but there's a reason for it.
This is great. This is great. This is very helpful.
Thank you. And please interrupt me if you have any questions, concerns. But in 2012, the Therapist Guild that I had helped develop was an LGBTQ affirmative therapist guild. We kept hearing about all these complaints about the harms of conversion therapy. And I also do a lot of work with survivors of sexual abuse. And I was quite aware that there's a perpetrator, a victim, and a bystander. And I kept thinking, I know about the harms of this therapy, and I shouldn't be a bystander. I should do something. So I galvanized my therapy group, and we found all the conversion therapists in Utah. We started writing preparing letters to file ethical complaints to the board against all of these individuals, these enemies. And then luckily I consulted with some important scholars, and also luckily I was able to talk with Sam Wolf, who is at that time an attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center. And he advised me. He said, "I think your ethics code says you have to talk to them before you file a formal complaint." We had never thought about actually talking to these people. We were just wanting to think, these were the enemies. We needed to stop and get rid of them. And that
Yeah.
really kind of shifted things. And I had this moment of thinking, well, perhaps we should become friends with them. And like a good therapist, I created a workshop with my guild, and instead of having enemies, we assigned each one of us as buddies, and one of us went out to these people and we said, "Listen, we have your back. We want you to be part of this workshop. We wanted to make safe for you to come join us and to come to this workshop, this Saturday workshop." And it worked. We had 200 people who hated each other to come into the same space. And instead of, again, fighting, which is normally when we meet, we debate each other and attack each other's views and all sort of stuff. We started the workshop with defining safety, co-creating safety guidelines, which is something I came from with the workshops that I do with to help men who are sexually abused. But we started the workshop with each of us defining what we needed from each other to have a safe and productive conversation about these issues. And then what we could also provide each other, and what we could do for ourselves to make it safe to have these kind of discussions, and what we could do as a group to make it safe to have these discussions. So we really changed the format. And that we changed the focus, instead of dividing each other, to coming up with, within these safety guidelines, common ground. What's our common ground? How did each of us think what was helpful and what was harmful? And we were really quite surprised. We were like, we're not causing harm. You're causing harm. And then they were like, no, you're causing harm. We're causing benefit. And it was really, I think, a big shift to go, oh, I can see how what the way I've been doing it or my colleagues have been doing it could be harmful. And I think that was quite important to build upon and get back to my dissertation of what can we do that will actually help most people, if not all people, with these conflicts. Well, I remember one time when one of my enemies, so-called, actually became tearful when he realized when I was saying that I felt shut out from their organization. He had some empathy that what it must have felt like for me to be shut out and to be devalued. And it was the same thing that I was hearing. I was like, oh, now I get that when we're saying that, when the mixed orientation relationships are doomed to fail, what that happens when people are having flourishing mixed orientation relationships, and how really that is doing. So it was really hearing how our, again, this ideology imposing that this is the right way, how it actually is it pushes out a group of individuals, which, again, what I think, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I appreciate how the verdict actually, what it kind of restores this idea of there's been a minority of individuals, people who want to change their sexual orientation and therapists who want to help them, how that actually has been minoritizing them and stigmatizing them. So for me, I just want to we kept emphasizing that the problem is minority stress and stigma. Prejudice is the problem. We're not the problems. We're not the enemies, but false information and stigmatizing people is the enemy. We joined forces and joined our collective resources together to come up with clinical protocols. We created pamphlets, and up to this day, we have I think a really solid clinical common ground document that helps people who don't want to use medical transition, those who do, those who don't want to use pronouns, and those who do. So to really, again, create a space for people to figure out what's best for them, which, again, I appreciate what the verdict is doing, creates more space for them. But I think, again, it has a potential to devalue others. I was an expert witness in 2015 for, I think, a very famous landmark case, the Jonah case, where it was a group, Jonah Ministry. They were found as to doing consumer fraud. They were promising something that they could not deliver, and they were getting paid for something we were saying that they could not deliver. I think one thing I did say, I described it as snake oil. that you're offering something that seems to be helpful, may have some benefits that I get from it, but it really is not going to be giving me what I really need. And it also could be getting me away from the treatment that I really do need. That was 2015. But what I did not like about that once again, I was opposing people when I really I wanted to join forces with them. So from after 2015, in 2016, joined forces with my enemies again. And we did a research project called the 4-Option Survey, where we wanted to figure out what helps people thrive and be well who are single and celibate, which again, there's this idea that you can't be celibate and happy. People who are single and non-celibate, which people say, no, you can't live a promiscuous lifestyle and be happy. And people who are in mixed orientation relationships and people who are in same-sex relationships. We gathered people from all of our, again, because we were sampling people from all of our populations. And I think we came up with variables that helped all 4 groups do well and what helped each group do well. Which again, that's that pluralism is, I'm not going to be able to live your life, and you're not going to live my life, but what's going to help all of us live our lives well? That was in 2016, and we've done lots of projects from that. And then in 2017, I took on this huge project, LGBTQIA plus peace building book project, where this is where Xander comes in. And so I took this on a big scale. I gathered 150 co-authors who hated each other or who differed in some way. And I gathered them on their topic of what they were really good about or what they were scholars about. And they were supposed to do the same thing, define the safety guidelines and come together and write a chapter on their, what would help clients. And that's what I'm hoping. 2024, 2 of the guidebooks came out. And just this month, the first 2 personal growth books came out. So if I could promote that, everything that I'm going to be talking about is going to be in the main book about exploring attitudes about sexual and gender diversity. There's I think a comprehensive section on what to do about conversion therapy.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about, so the 2 volumes that were released in 2024, they were more kind of practice related. Is that right?
Well, they're all for everybody. And that's, again, I take this idea. I'm a people pleaser by nature and by conditioning. I'm trying to help make everybody happy. And so the books can be read by consumers, the general public, and could be helpful for clinicians and academics and researchers and I hope politicians. And they're 10 chapters of 10 topics. And then the 12 books that are coming from that they're taking the chapter and they're making books from each of the chapters. So if you read the 2 books, guidebooks, you'll get a good comprehensive overview with some really important skills and ideas. And then we're just going to keep expounding on that. And Xander is going to be in the additional one about navigating family conflicts about these issues.
Well, you've done some excellent work and had some great experiences, and I think I came to know you through the Reconciliation and Growth Project in Utah, and just seeing some of the things that came from that, the common ground, the clinical common ground document that I learned about it through that Reconciliation and Growth. That was really interesting and really helpful. And I think that it does what we've been talking about is promoting pluralism.
Yeah, and I think promoting pluralism promotes peace. And that's where I want to go, is how to create long-standing internal peace, personal peace, and then social peace.
Right.
So I appreciate what we're all doing here.
That's great. That's great. And that's the basis of what our pro-social movement has been within, and what pro-social workers does. We dialogue, we humanize differences, including the differences within. It's not like we're all or nothing. There's different parts of our identity, and those parts we have to dialogue and integrate. And the second thing we do is dialogue across those differences, but it's not like a free-for-all. We stand for those ethical principles, and specifically within social work, the social work code of ethics. But our colleagues like yourself and others in other professions, we definitely want you to practice within your codes as well. So thank you.
Exactly.
So with that said,
Can I say something really quickly, Matt?
Yeah, please go for it.
I wanted to say something about just acknowledging the state of Utah, right? In the sense that I lived in Salt Lake City, West Jordan, Sandy area in the mid 1980s. And I remember what life was like being a young lesbian and having to hide and find the bars, which were often without addresses or names on them. And, on the other side of the tracks, literally, I think when it was called tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
And, right. And, I went to the lesbian one, which was Puss in Boots.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I remember that. And then all of a sudden you jump forward, not even to now, to prior to now, Salt Lake City having a lesbian mayor, to the Utah Compromise around youth and gender identity, to your governor coming to Braver Angels convention and speaking and bringing with him, oh gosh, it's terrible that I'm forgetting his name all of a sudden, the executive director of Equality Utah.
Troy Williams.
Huh?
Troy Williams.
Yes, Troy, who I had the wonderful opportunity to sit down with. And it was with our discussion that I created the Equality Caucus in Braver Angels. And he was part of the steering committee that helped that happen. And I sat in a room where him and the governor were talking about, like, he did that. He went to the governor's office and they had ongoing meetings. And it's, you've used the word enemies, because I think you're using it in that, in that way of like, we shouldn't be talking to those people, and those are bad people, and those are wrong people. And for a state to go from being perceived of as intolerant to, and I believe in many ways, leading. And I think the governor mentioned something about he had hoped that more, quote, red states would have gone the same direction and said, we're going to say no to medical transition, but we're going to set aside $1 million for people to be able to get counseling, right? The compromise on these issues. And so I just think it's wonderful that, that when we sort of, as time passes and we hold out hope that, that people can come around, governments can come around, institutions can come around. I know I've been on some website within the last year that's Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints specific, that has really very different statements about same-sex attraction and relationships. And so it's a world of difference. And that gives me hope that that more people and more organizations, more agencies, more governments on the state level can do that and not be enemies of each other, right? Not do that, we're going to shut everything down, we're going to open everything up. Those two extremes are not good for anybody except to win in your position. But that's not good for the people, right? It's this actually coming together. And it doesn't mean we like things, doesn't mean that we endorse them, doesn't mean that we want to and practice them, but pluralism doesn't require those things.
If I could maybe just frame what you just described, because there are four options, I think, of this aggressiveness of enemies. I have to fight you, I have to cancel you, I have to get rid of you, I have to eliminate you. Those efforts, that's a human reflex. But it's shifting from aggressiveness to assertiveness. So that's why I want to keep helping thinking there's another option besides, I think Xander said, either being passive or aggressive or passive aggressive. We can be assertive. And I don't think we have learned the skills yet to be culturally assertive. But that's what I think we're all about here today.
Well, and that is it. That if we can move from that aggressive and even legalistic, because our legal system is by nature adversarial. And so if we can move from an adversarial posture to a truly pluralistic, peace-seeking posture, that is really what being pro-social is about, and pro-social workers is ultimately about, is putting the social back into social work and moving away from this adversarial nature. So you and Xander both have had some experiences with this. You've been, you've been on the train for, in this world for 30, 40 years now. And it's interesting, you have some perspective that you might be able to help with, because one of the concerns about Childs versus Salazar was the conflation of what Ms. Childs was reportedly doing with conversion therapy, or using these aversive methods that were highly coercive and found to be destructive. There was concern about conflation there. The two of you maybe just share your own experiences and kind of unpack that a little bit about what are we talking about when we're talking about conversion therapy, and what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah, one of the things I keep reading about is when people are talking about, they'll say conversion therapy. Sometimes people say reparative therapy. I'm also reading more recently, people have shifted to saying change efforts, right? And they're including in, like in the U.S. joint statement, right, on conversion efforts. So they're inclusive. They're including in that psychotherapeutic, medical, transformational ministries, as they call them, right? Like the ex-gay ministries, or like Jonah, things like that. So it's interesting it's not clear to me what conversion therapy is and isn't, because I couldn't find a definition that really broke down which techniques. Like, I saw a statement that said that the UN Council on Human Rights liken change effort techniques to
Torture.
And I thought, okay, now there's a difference between like what I went through, which the therapist at the time called fashion therapy. I was in a residential psychiatric hospital for a year, and I was required to go through these sessions where I was encouraged to be more feminine, right? Because as a trans man, I'm female, so I was a young woman, very masculine and lesbian. And so I was encouraged to act more femininely, dress more femininely. They would bring in clothes for me to change into, and they would teach me how to do makeup. And then they would have me walk around the unit, right? I mentioned this in the last podcast and to experience what it was like to be whistled at and catcalled, as if that had never happened to me, it's like, was that tantamount to torture? No, not for me, but for somebody, it could have been very damaging psychologically and spiritually in all the different ways. But for me, I didn't buy it. I knew it was BS, and I just went along with it. So I got the rewards that came with going along with it, getting to go home for the weekend, or, watch the thing I wanted to watch on TV, which at the time was Dallas. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, I played the game, but I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. We weren't talking necessarily conversion therapy in the 90s. We weren't using that kind of language, but it stuck with me. And even when I was out of that situation, I was back at home and I was back in school. I actually had a girlfriend in high school, and her mother was very religious. And I found out a few years later that she sent her into ex-gay ministries after she found out about us, right? So I had that experience. And then ultimately, one of the biggest catalysts for me to change my thinking from the enemy kind of, victim mentality was in the mid 1990s. And I was in Denver, Colorado. I was going to college there in Denver, and I had just come from the Pride Festival, right? The Gay Pride Festival, we typically just called it then. And I had been volunteering at one of the booths, probably for, I don't know, I was running the Lesbian Avengers chapter there, so it might have been for that, or maybe the college. My brain dumps a lot of things out, but I do recall those sort of overviews. I was there, I had been volunteering, and then I was walking home from that event, and there was a guy standing across the street on the grounds of the Capitol building, handing out those little comic book tracts. If you remember those little comic book tracts that had all the sinful things in them. And this one was about homosexuality, and I took it and I flipped through it, and I just started arguing with this guy. And I'll cut to the end. I quote, won. I won the debate, and I walked away, and I felt victorious for about a moment. And then I felt really terrible, because I thought, wait a minute, did I just do to that guy what he probably would have done to me, and what has been done to me over the years, being confronted by these kinds of individuals? I went to a church for a number of years that was protested by the Westboro Baptist church people, right? And so I immediately felt badly about what I did, and I turned around and I went back and I apologized to him. And it was in that moment I made a commitment. I'm going to go to seminary, and I'm going to learn, why is it that certain conservative religious groups, not just Christian, because we put a lot of blame on Christianity when it's basically conservative or fundamentalist or orthodox of all religions, take this similar stance against LGBT people. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to learn, where's that coming from and what can I do about it? And so I went to seminary and I did a master's of theological studies. And when you were talking, Lee, about your dissertation, it immediately reminded me, oh yeah, in my master's program, I wrote a synthesis paper. So it wasn't a thesis, they called it a synthesis. And it was focused on healing from spiritual violence right? So this idea of conversion or excommunication or estrangement or whatever it is that people experience from either their church and or their family based on religious convictions and beliefs and values, that they were wrong, sinful, going to hell, and how that had been a type of spiritual violence. I wouldn't use that language now because violence, and I was contributing to the misuse, I think, of the word violence, but that's kind of, I had been trained in nonviolent communication, right? So I was using it in that sort of way. But yeah, so healing from that versus always being a victim of it, being angry for it, but finding a way to heal from it. A lot of shame, I think, was, that was a component of my work. And so one of the projects I started working on was I wanted to find every single religion's open and affirming options.
Mhm.
From Moravians to Jains to Hindus to Jews to Muslims to Episcopalians to Lutherans, everything, right? And so I created this huge list. And again, we're talking, this is 2003 and 4, pre-opportunity to use the internet and create websites in the way that we can now. So it's on a memory stick in a bag full of memory sticks. But it was like everything I could find. And then I would go to public events and people would say, I used to be Catholic, but the church's stance on, I'd be like, oh, do you know about dignity? Well, have you thought about maybe the Episcopal Church? It's sort of like Catholic Light, and they've got the More Light organization, right? So and all of a sudden I could see some of that, not to use the word light again, but I could see the lights coming back on, right? I could see the, like you said, Lee, I could be happy and gay or happy and trans and have a reconciliation of being able to be spiritual. I don't have to reject religion or spirituality. I don't have to reject. I can actually find it just in a different place, but it can be so similar. I'm like, you don't have to all become Unitarians or go sit at the Sangha and become Buddhist. Because if you go and you want to go all the way, you want ordination, they're going to have similar prohibitions in a lot of these, maybe not in the United States, but if you go and practice outside the United States. And so and I continue to do that kind of work, just sort of like letting people know, like, oh yeah, you can, be happy and practice your religion or faith, whether it's in an organized capacity or not. And the idea is to bring peace, right? To bring peace to the person, and then they can go forward and pass that peace along.
So Xander,
yeah.
You've been trying to create community within communities, within faith communities.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned earlier that you weren't able to find or define conversion therapy, or because that's what's coming out of Childs versus Salazar. Everything in the headlines is, conversion therapy ban, and, is overturned, and it's really an emphasis on conversion therapy. But you weren't able to find a definition or nail it down.
Well, yes.
Okay.
But the NASW has a position statement. I think the most recent iteration is from 2015, which I was part of the rewrite of that, because it starts previous to that, maybe like 2000 or even earlier. And every so often it was being updated. And so I was serving on the National Committee for LGBT Issues within the NASW. At that point, I served from 2013 to almost 22. So I did 8 years on that committee. There's the NASW kind of definition. There's also the CSWE, right? Council on Social Work Education, that accreditates our BSW and MSW and DSW programs. And then there's the U.S. Joint Statement on Conversion Efforts. And then there's the laws, right? And each state, I think, defines it differently, but I don't know that they go into enough detail. I think the vagueness serves the purpose, right? To just say techniques, efforts. For those just listening, I did scare quotes around those words, because then, and I think that's probably why the case was brought in Colorado prior to actually being found guilty or in violation of the law, to try and sort of get ahead of it. And maybe, I don't know, I said in the last podcast, I don't think it should have gone that way. I think somebody should have brought a court case because they had actually been charged, so we could get more concrete on this issue. I don't think there's enough concreteness about which techniques. Hooking somebody's genital to electrodes? Right. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Putting me in a dress and parading me around? I mean, stupid, not nice, not harmful to me, could be harmful, but there's a clear difference in my mind between having somebody hooked up to electrodes or having them smell rotten meat while looking at pornographic images to create a disgust and revulsion. Like that to me, that's conduct versus speech, which is what this case also fell on.
So Lee and Xander, the way that the attorneys described it, the Miss Child's attorneys described it, was voluntary speech between and towards self-determined goals between a minor and a professional. And so that's my recollection anyway of how they define that. Does that constitute, or how, under what conditions might that constitute conversion therapy? Lee, you want to comment on that?
Oh, I have a lot to comment on this. So Xander is a good example of he's a unique individual who had some resilience going in to, and these methods are being applied to him. That he was able to say, well, this is stupid, and it didn't affect him. But like Xander said, someone who would be actually dealing with a lot of shame and struggles, it really would have maybe collapsed them. So we have to also realize that again, I'll answer your question, but it's really important that all therapists realize that there's a big variety of clients who are seeking help. Those who have a different genetics, temperament, orientations, experiences with trauma. So that I think is really important. I think also Xander talked about options, that we need options rather than cures. So I definitely want to highlight that. But just to kind of simplify these things of what is conversion therapy or efforts and what's harmful and what's not harmful. I think if you think about, to use John Gottman's and his research terminology, are you turning against, away, or toward? And so efforts that turn against someone's orientation, and I'm not describing necessarily their identity. I'm talking about their orientation, turning against their attractions or their lack of attractions. So who they are, what they're about. So if you, like when I was a teenager, I was turning against my attractions to stop them. It's negative coping. When you use negative coping, research shows it will be ineffective and harmful and potentially harmful. So any efforts that turn against your attractions, your orientation, your gender experience, how you experience yourself, whether society wants you to or you want to, is going to fail. I've described these efforts as identity abuse. And I'm not saying abusing a gay identity, but you're abusing who you are as all about what makes you as a person. So if you're turning against, and there's also varieties of way you can turn against. You can deny, you can dismiss, you can devalue, you can attack, you can be contemptuous against, or you can
medicalize.
What's that?
You can medicalize or pathologize it.
Pathologize, you can attack violence, and then we get to those aversion techniques. So I think when you think about the gradients of how intensity is the turning against, which I think Mrs. Childs is not realizing that she's turning against in some way and reinforcing her clients to turn against themselves in some way. So you think about the frequency and the intensity of turning against yourself and away from yourself. So it's not just attacking yourself or rejecting yourself, it's neglecting yourself. And how you're turning toward this other people or authorities or somebody else. So that itself, if you're promoting, if you're reinforcing, if you're allowing, colluding with the client to turn against themselves or to neglect themselves, you're doing the conversion efforts. What I like that the terminology is psychache. It's a term that Edwin, I forget his last name, starts with an S, describe for people who attempt suicide. There's such emotional pain inside from this self-rejection. Because we know that when you reject yourself, it feels the same as someone physically attacking you. So it's this constant accumulation of self-reject, self-neglect, self-betrayal. It hurts. So if you tell me, if you think about people have a history of self-rejection and being rejected, and then they're supposed to wear something that doesn't fit who they are, that's going to be more tense inside, causes emotional pain. That psychache leads to suicide. So even though Xander didn't attempt suicide after these efforts, somebody who had been promoted to do so would eventually, like I did, I thought there's too much pain inside and I was too hopeless. And it kept reinforcing this shame that there's no other option. But to really clarify, I think, so any efforts that you're supposed to reinforce self-rejection and self-neglect, any efforts that reinforce stigma or prejudice, which again, I think those are the enemies here. That any like this, it's the false premise idea. There was a false premise that Xander acted like a woman, Xander would be a woman and would act like a heterosexual woman. So there's this false premise, false causes, false cures, that if you just know who you really are, then you'll be like the rest of us. So that's the self-neglect, self-rejection. It's reinforcing prejudice and stigma. And then it's also limiting and restricting exploration, education about the wide, many variety ways to resolve these kind of conflicts, which again, that's where, like Xander, you and I have the same hard drive, I think, because I also went and I found every single faith community that tried to find a way to resolve this. So yes, therapists need to have a big view in their minds of how clients can resolve this. And I'm not necessarily sure that Ms. Childs does, or if she's offering that to her clients. Even though clients don't want that, clients get very, clients are coming to us for help. And they have an idea of how to help themselves, but that's why they come to us, because they don't know how to help themselves. So if I think that this is the only way to help you, I have a one-size approach, I'm not understanding that there are many ways, many life paths possible to resolve these conflicts. So again, what conversion therapy is, if it's turning against yourself, self-rejection, self-neglect, reinforcing prejudice, stigma, limiting exploration, and using a one-size-fits-all approach, that's going to create these false hopes, leads to disappointment, and that's why some people kill themselves, do more self-negation, or delay their resolution, delay their identity development. Does that make sense of what that's
wonderful? Because if you try to unpack or deconstruct yourself or your identity, or turn against the different parts of yourself that may be difficult for you to integrate, ultimately that's part of the therapeutic journey, is that integration. It's exploring that, and I'm just pontificating now, or sharing my own thoughts, that the exploration and the integration ultimately can create some peace within. And it's not like it's living happily ever after. It's an ongoing process. Peace is very tentative, and it's an active process, and that aligns with some of the things that we were talking about last week, that are behind everything that we're doing within Pro Social Workers, creating that pluralism within, but also pluralism socially and connecting with others. So that's a great explanation, Lee. Thank you.
So I do want to say that Mrs. Childs has the approach that she's offering has really important things, and unfortunately, she's getting labeled as conversion therapy and hate speech, and this is what I think the problem has been for the bans. So this is what I've gathered from what I summarized from her approach. So I'll read that off of what I think is what she's doing that's helpful. But let me also just back up. So right when the Utah was debating or doing the legislation about the ban on conversion therapy, after all the work that we had done with my group, we actually came up with some resolution, and we gave them to the attorney, saying this is what you should be legislating. And it was like all 8 of us in this group, all 8 of us could agree that this approach would help all of us. And what really frustrated me was the attorneys dismissed it, and they went with the national template. And I think that's why we're here today, because they ignored what Ms. Childs and my colleagues were saying. No, you need to make space for people who want to help with these issues. And that's where we're at. So that's what I want to say is what she is promoting is helpful, but what she also is promoting is also harmful. So if I can share with just read the list that I gathered, that I hope all therapists would be doing with these clients. This is what I think should be, what I appreciate about her approach, and what should not be labeled as hate speech or conversion therapy, because it promotes autonomy and justice and has some benefits for some people who are sexually and gender fluid. So she works with the clients who want to transition. So if someone who doesn't want to transition, if they want to identify with the Burke sex, instead of turning them away, she says, I'll help you out. That's a really good thing. We want to help these people. She helps explore ways to align the identity and behavior with her goals. So she uses her speech to explore options. She's supporting clients who want to live in accordance to the religious teachings, who want to stay married. So she's supporting them rather than saying, go away. You can't do that. She supports behavior change tied to those goals. So she says, I'm going to help you live celibately if that's what you want. I'm going to help you pursue heterosexual relationships. If you don't want to do medical transition or social transition, I'm going to support you. So very important. That reduces minority stress. She supposedly does a lot of reflection, open discussion of their attractions, identity, distress. She talks about that supposedly with them and just airs that out. She gets to, I'm assuming all this. This is what she says she does, but she talks about it with them. What does it mean when you do this? Help me understand that. So there's a reflection on how they interpret those experiences. How do you make sense of that? All that's collaborative meaning making, I think, as it was framed. We're just trying to understand the person. I think she says that she examines thoughts and beliefs. Well, that's what therapists do. We examine thoughts and beliefs. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. She identifies internal conflicts. For example, the conflict between values and behaviors and values and something else and society or internal stuff. She works with emotions like shame, anxiety, confusion, all very essential and therapeutic and mental health duties. She helps clients choose behaviors consistent with their goals. So for celibacy or heterosexual relationships, yes, I'm going to join with my clients with their goals. She develops plans to follow through on those choices. She promotes their efforts to live the life that they want to live. That's, so they're not alone in their struggles. She helps them manage the distress related to unwanted feelings, probably the shame that comes up when they act out, the guilt that happens. And, she says she builds emotional regulation skills. That's what therapists should be doing. Clients, we don't know how to deal with emotions. Supposedly we therapists do know how to. She helps them respond to urges or identity conflicts in ways that fit their goals. So if I want to act out, how to help manage those urges. And then we get into and she's also flexible and responsible. But then I start to worry, because then she starts to say that she helps clients accept their body as is. And that's really important goal if you're not a specific type of gender diverse person. So if you're someone who starts struggling with stigma about or sexism, like this is the only way a real man or a real woman, or this is what a real man's body looks like, or a real woman's body looks like. I think it's good to do cognitive behavioral therapy and help you examine the negative beliefs about your body. That's really important for some people. But I think she's ignoring, or she doesn't know about, or she dismisses that there's some population of individuals who are actually struggling, and when they look at their body parts, their body sex traits, that they're averse to it. They're not phobic to it. They're like, you're afraid of it or ashamed of it. They're averse to it. It's very similar, I think, when some people are. I'm afraid to have sex versus I'm averse to having sex. Aversion and phobia are two different things. Again, it's fear or shame, or this sense of, that's not me. And so if she's working with clients who are gender body, the terms that I came up with from my dialogue with all these years is gender body dysphoria or gender body aversion, which is very different than gender role aversion or gender role dysphoria or gender shame. I think she thinks she's helping people with gender shame or body dysmorphia or body image problems. That's very important. But if she's using those efforts, those interventions for the minority of people who are actually struggling with gender body dysphoria, she's saying, yes, you can use mindfulness to stare at your body part and eventually you'll be okay with it. It's like telling me my orientation is I love men and I'm really averse to having sex with women. It's not like I love women. I'm not afraid of women. I just don't want to have sex with women. I'm averse to it. So back to conversion therapy efforts back in the 70s, what I was told if I was gone to a conversion therapist was you just got to have sex with women and eventually that phobia will go away. Well, that's kind of what her efforts are saying, that, if you I'll help you expose yourself to your body parts you don't like and that fear will go away. that's going to be harmful to a subset of people. So that's what she's either ignorant of, or she was not trained about, or she's been misinformed about. A population that she says, let me help you align yourself with your sex assigned at birth, she's going to cause harm to those people. So again, that idea of bringing peace and harmony with your body, that sounds good for a majority of people, but that's going to be harmful to other people. I think she and a lot of people have a misunderstanding what affirmative interventions are. And she's saying she thinks she's supposed to affirm or validate or tell people you're trans and therefore this is what you are. That's not affirmative therapy. If people think that's affirmative therapy, they have been misinformed. I'll share more about that hopefully before we're done here. But she was saying that she wants to be able to tell people what they truly are. Well, that's the same problem of if you're trying to tell people that, you're a male because you were born biologically male, she's doing the same imposing ideology, believing that this is the way you truly are. Again, I think she says helping them live consistently with God's design, including their biological sex, in accordance with reality and truth. So there's a blind spot of hers, unconscious bias, it sounds like, that she thinks we're all supposed to fit into one box, this gender box that she's now created, and then thrown out the other box. So again, I think her one-size approach is going to be harmful for a minority of people. Again, if the efforts, people who try to be celibate and people who try to be heterosexual, if they have a same-sex orientation, some of that's going to work for them, depending on their sex drive. There's a and Xander, I think you misspoke, or when you said in the last podcast that people who are exclusively same-sex attracted are rare. I'm not sure what you meant by rare, but it could have felt like sounded like dismissive. I don't think maybe you were trying to do that, but it sounds like also that Ms. Childs also is not either she thinks we're all born neutral, blank slates, or we're all born heterosexual. And I think, Xander, you were also kind of eliminating to saying we're not born that way. But she kind of says this idea of I think she's not understanding that if someone has this aversion or they don't have this attraction to the other sex, that if I suppress these attractions, something naturally is going to happen. This is going to be helpful for her approach is going to help for people who are bisexual, plurisexual, or fluid. That's going to be very helpful. Again, it depends on what kind of bisexual person they are. Especially could be helpful for people, because people who are born assigned female at birth, their sexuality tends to be more context relationship dependent. Not all of them, though, because there are some who have that aversion that I'm talking about. So with her approach of saying, she's going to try to help people to live the right way, it's going to be harmful to a certain amount of people. And that's what was harmful for me. It was like, there's no amount of way that I'm going to sleep with a woman and not dissociate or make it last or not have an affair eventually. This faking it, I think that Xander was talking about. So if I can just... So again, I do think some of those approaches of acceptance and values-driven action, maybe self-compassion if she's teaching that, processing trauma, all those are going to be important things. But I think what many people are saying that we should be treating mental health or mental disorders. So we should be treating anxiety, depression, shame, those things, and then seeing what happens to the sexual orientation. That's what I wish people would really keep focusing on, that it's not about discouraging or encouraging any identity. So if she's encouraging them to be heterosexual or discouraging them even or colluding with them, because she's talking about collaborative approach. Well, you can be collaborative and colluding, reinforcing someone's false beliefs if you don't know about them. So I could be reinforcing false beliefs about racism, everyone acts that way. So if I'm not aware of the prejudice, I'm going to be causing harm. Let me pause for a second.
Right.
Yeah, I think when I mentioned the exclusively, I was very loosely using like the Kinsey scale of the small number of people, percentage of people that are exclusively heterosexually attracted and only have had heterosexual sexual relations, and on the other side, exclusively homosexual and only homosexual sexual encounters. That that most people are not at the far end of either of those scales, if I remember the Kinsey
Well,
scale
actually, I would
correctly.
disagree. I would, what if you in my chapter, in the chapter in the first book, we list all the possible biological correlations, and also in this second book that I talk about exploring attitudes, is that 80% of the population, I do think, are completely heterosexual. So to disagree with what you're saying, Xander, that the majority of people don't have, they're exclusively heterosexual. They may not have the aversion that I was talking about. But they don't have the attractions to the same sex or the other.
Yeah.
The
Well, maybe it's possible that Kinsey, the places he was going into, he was just being exposed to people that were a bit more adventurous. And
Well, the problem with the Kinsey scale is a one-dimensional scale, and so you need to really have an X and a Y continuum. And in my scale that I have a scale that's negative. And his scale, there's no negative. You just go one way or the other. And if you're one way, does that mean that you're less another way? That's what's confusing about the Kinsey scale. And so what I love about the scale that I've been developing is this how much aversion do you have toward having sex with the other, between men and women and non-binary individuals? How much do you want to have sex with them? And so it gets more complex. And I do believe in, I think 2 to 4% of the population are only attracted to the same sex. So I think there's some sense there, but a lot of people thought that bisexuality was rare. And actually bisexuality is, there's more bisexuals or plurisexual individuals than there are exclusively same-sex attracted people. But there are a lot more individuals who are only attracted to the other sex. But again, I also want to emphasize that when a client comes to me, I don't know what their sexual orientation is. I don't know what their romantic orientation is, which are two different things. I don't know what their sex drive is. I don't know where they're going. So I think that's what people have to keep thinking. Because if I was Mrs. Child's client, you would think that I would be married to a woman and a religious leader right now, but I'm not. So that's where we also have this hands-off approach of, I don't know your orientation. I want to help you. I want to discover what that is for you, or what your.
And I think that's a really important point and what we were describing before is when the state or anybody else presumes to know what is right and inserts themselves into the therapy room, that's where I think we have some concern, that you go in with a preconceived hierarchy of what is most important, what is real. You're not looking at the client and their self-determined priorities, their self-determined values and goals, and looking at that. And if Miss Childs takes what's common or somewhat popular to see that we're medical beings or physiological beings, and what you are physical that's my premise. That's who you are, and so I'm going to help you move towards that. That can move away from that client self-determination and how the client is bringing in their own perspective, their own culture, regardless of what their gender, sex, nationality, race, religious background, sexual orientation. There's so many variables in there that I think it's just important that we slow things down sometimes and pause and say, what does this mean? Just as we are trying to unpack now, what does conversion therapy mean? And so it's important that we find some consistent approaches to understanding one another and helping somebody understand themselves. So thank you.
I could imagine that another possible scenario would be a gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans person goes to a quote unquote affirming therapist, right? Somebody who is maybe even a member of the LGBT community themselves, or markets themselves as being friendly or informed, these kinds of ways that things get labeled, and really encourages them to live your best gay life, live your best trans life. And I could see how for certain individuals, harm could come of it because they could end up being estranged from their family, who won't accept their sexual orientation or gender identity. They could become excommunicated or completely rejected by their faith community, which could be really important to them. In the short term, I could see that there might be this sense of like happiness and knowing who they are and becoming part of this community, especially with young people who I think they refer to it as getting love bombed by their peers and everybody around them when they come out or disclose who they are in maybe a high school setting, and it's championed and it's cheered and it's celebrated, because the last thing you want to be is, a cisgender heterosexual person, like, right? And so, but I could see how that is, for some people, could actually end up in the long term being harmful for them because they're losing out. It's like that glitter family isn't going to be there for them at the bedside in the hospital, isn't going to be there for them, when they're having whatever kind of life struggles necessarily. That for a lot of us, it's our family, our biological family, right? And so that's why I think it's best to just kind of stay in our lane, right? And it doesn't mean I agree with my clients' goals or their vision for themselves in life. And we can put up some sort of, not guardrails, but we can kind of have people think it through. Like, if you go this route, what do you foresee are going to be sort of the pros and cons of it, right? Have you had conversations with people in your family about this? Do you have friends who have had a similar experience? Saying, what have you read? What have you watched? Because, that whole exploration, not just of identity, but what is your life going to be like if you are 30 years from now, estranged from your family, you have no children, and you don't have a sense of community around you that can provide that support, not just be there to party with you, right? To actually be there for you in that way that family and really close friendships can provide. And I don't know that people are ever thinking about that possibility. I mean, of course, some people are, but that's going to be that doesn't really ever happen. And it's like, well, it reminds me of how upset I used to get in my MSW program when students and faculty would dismiss the outliers. I was like, some of us are outliers. Don't dismiss the outliers. Mm-hmm. It really upset me, especially when a public health professor was doing it. I was like, as an epidemiologist, I'm really disappointed in you disregarding the outliers, right? And so I think about this all the time. I think about the little bits and pieces of what if like the deterrence and the harm that can come from that, and the assurance that your life is going to be better, and everybody should be queer, right? I think that's our future. I think people are driving towards that. And I'm like, no, that's not a good future for everybody. Yeah.
If I could also see, Xander, I think when I was trained two decades ago in writing letters for people who wanted to transition. And I think things that have veered a lot from this, from my training. But when I do a letter, an assessment, I'm not just doing I'm doing eligibility. Do you meet the diagnosis of gender dysphoria? I'm also doing, are you ready for these treatments? And I think that's what you're talking about. Is I want to make sure my clients have the skills to deal with stigma, to deal with rejection. So I think that's, rather than saying you're promoting a gay identity, that is not affirmative therapy. Affirmative therapy is not promoting an identity. Affirmative therapy, really, I want to reclaim that. What I was taught there, affirmative therapy is about noticing the oppression, the stigmatizing, the false beliefs onto the person, and noticing the null environment where there's not been enough accurate information, enough resources. And affirmative therapy counteracts that we address the false information and we provide what was not there. So clients coming in who are struggling with being gay or bisexual or trans or whatever, they likely don't have the skills to deal with discrimination. That's what I think, Xander, you're talking about, is I need to help them navigate when people hate them. And that's not about saying, well, you have to like me. Well, good luck with that. That's not going to work either, because that's back to aggressive and pleading, and that's a sense of powerlessness. I want to help clients. I think, Xander, again, you and I, we developed our identity in the face of no one's going to like me, so I have to like myself. I love the 90s. I love navigating, trying to find these places on my own. Nobody would told me that there's a community that's going to support me. And I think that's another thing, is that there's people come to this idea that the gay or trans community is supposed to be there. Well, I'm sorry, there is no institution called the gay community or trans community. So there's a big let up, I think you're talking about. So again, our duty as a therapist working with this population is to help them build stigma competence. I think I like that term. Is how am I going to deal with stigma outside of me and inside of me, and so that I'm ready to move forward and to be and live in authentic ways.
So Lee, speak a little bit more about use the term oppression and the null. What was it? The null
Environment.
environment. Describe that a little bit more. What do you mean by that?
So the null environment would be like women aren't taught that they can be engineers. They're taught there's something else. And so when
Okay.
women go into engineering fields, there's no maybe representation of them being great engineers. And so the null environment would be that everyone's talking about heterosexual relationships and cisgender bodies in school, but no one's
Hmm.
saying, that you can live a happy life in a gay relationship, and you can live a happy life transitioning. I think we've gone to the other extreme, which I think, Xander, you're most concerned about. People are now promoting that everybody's trans. And I think people have misunderstood and children have misunderstood what that means to be trans. So I think, again, there's an aggressiveness in these approaches. But that's what I think. Minority stress is the problem. And minority stress is prejudice, which is false beliefs, and lack of information, lack of safety, and stigma, which is a labeling of you are wrong, you are less than, and then the internalized how I'm doing that inside myself. And again, that's going to fit across faith diversity, racial diversity, or sexual diversity or gender diversity. So that's
Hmm.
what I have to understand is what did my client not get? That's why it's not that I'm going to tell them they're transsexual or transgender.
Okay.
I'm going to say, there are people like you. Let me connect you with those people.
Gotcha. So when we used this term last time about essentializing or reducing people to a particular identity marker or something like that, when we do that, we neglect this null environment where there are other parts of themselves that also may flourish or may develop. And when we recognize that, what I'm hearing you say is we can give space so that rather than an either or, it can be both and.
Yeah, I kind of heard the last time in your podcast and maybe you weren't trying to, but saying that essentialism is the problem. And I think,
Well, that's one problem. Yeah.
well, again, I think people are born with natural patterns of their sexual attractions or lack of attraction.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I think if we ignore that, then we go back to the sense that I can condition anybody to be anything I want them to be. So I think if we can think about
Yeah.
attractions, identity, and behavior and what's possible within that for the person, then people have more options in their identity development.
Yeah.
I think within like the trans context, what unfortunately happens is the essentializing of gender traits. If you are female and you have masculine traits, the interpretation by many now is you're trans, you should transition because you're probably a boy or a man.
Yeah.
So it's essentializing the traits, or it's I reject the traditional gender role based on my culture for a man or a woman, and all of a sudden that it's being interpreted. I saw that a lot with the parents of the young kids, and I would say, how did you know your 8-year-old was a trans boy? They hated wearing dresses and they would rather play with trucks. And I was thinking, oh, well, that's just gender nonconformity. That's just sex trait, differences. And they would say, yeah, but isn't that how you were when you were a little kid? And it'd be like, so they were, but it's like, but not every gender nonconforming male or female grows up to be one, gay or lesbian or some, or trans, but it became reduced to that.
Yeah.
Right. So the essentialism of those traits.
Well, I want to break things apart because you've confused them, you and them and everybody else. Many people are confusing maleness and masculinity. And I do think there are male traits and masculine traits, and there are feminine traits and female traits. And when a child is saying, I'm a boy, they're not thinking maleness, femaleness. They're thinking masculinity, femininity. And that's what the parents are also saying as well. And you're exactly right. The most gender nonconforming children, and even those who say that I'm the other sex, most of them are going to transition and go, no, I guess I was wrong. I'm just a cisgender person who, whatever. But I do think we have to also acknowledge that there is an essentialism of these maleness, femaleness, masculinity, and femininity. And the way I've termed them is gender body experience and gender role orientation. And I think when people and educators and parents and clinicians are able to really think about gender body experience, and because I think all of us have a gender body experience, in meaning what are the male, female, ambiguous mixed traits that we resonate with, that fit with us and don't fit with us. All of us could, again, I have this graph of, a penis fits for me, a vagina doesn't fit for me, or maybe I have a vagina, who cares? So when we really understand that a gender body experience, that's very different than gender role orientation. I have this sort of range of masculinity and femininity traits, but I really can't do those other traits. So that's what I wish that people would get more complex and more concrete about what we're talking about with these issues. Because again, I think we've lost the category of transsexual.
Yes. Well, the category of transsexual has been problematized within the trans community.
That's a problem.
Yes.
And I think transgender used to be the big category, but I think people started seeing transgender people as binary transgender people. And so that became, I think, what you're talking about is if you're a binary gender conforming person, then you must be transsexual. And then the big category is gender diverse, which I appreciate, and non-binary fits in there. But I think we've misunderstood a lot of terms. And that's why, again, with the adversarial collaboration that I've been doing, and I know we're kind of running out of time, but I think that's one other point. Back to Nafis, I think one thing I really appreciate what your concern was last time was how are we going to resolve this? If we're predicting of this, now we have this chaos with anything goes. I do think the way forward, all task forces, anything who are going to be talking about these issues have to have an adversarial collaboration approach, that we have to find ways that you think differently than I do about these topics. Let's come together and research it or create a policy that all of us can agree on. So that's what I'm really hoping, that the way forward is adversarial collaboration.
The University of Pennsylvania has that, the adversarial collaboration project, which has turned out a good number of research studies by Corey Clark and others. I think that is hopefully the future of academia. I can speak to academia more than I can to practice, but I'm hopeful that the future holds those collaborative efforts to say this author disagrees with that author based on their publications. Let's have them work together, give them a couple $10,000, $20,000 to do that, so this way they don't go at each other. And I think that's where competition breeds success.
Yes.
So Lee, people have different degrees of experience and expertise and understanding who we interact with and will view this podcast. Could you clarify or differentiate some terms for us? So, for example, you talked about maleness, femaleness, masculinity, femininity. You also talked about, so if you can differentiate those for us, but also gender body identity versus biological sex identity. How are those similar or different?
So one of the new terms that came up from this adversarial collaboration, we were trying to figure out, what is this misunderstanding? I understand what I'm talking about. You don't understand this. And in the misunderstanding, that's where prejudice gets created. And that's where people are attacking each other, is this idea of gender identity. I know what I mean by gender identity. You all think you know what you mean by gender identity. And then we fight because we have different ideas of what gender
linguistic issues. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I use gender identity and sexual identity as the big category. And those can be, they're essential. They come from biological traits, but also from social construction of how we're told to think about these issues. So one of the terms that seemed to make more sense to help people understand was this gender body experience. And the way to map that out would be, again, this XY continuum is how much does so you list all the major male sex characteristics, like having a penis, having testicles, having broad shoulders, being hairy,
hairless.
boys, and then you list all the sex characteristics of females: breasts, vagina, smooth skin, hips, wide hips, and then also you list ambiguous traits. Those who are born with differences of sex differences, intersex variations. You list those things, and you ask them, to what degree does embodying these traits fit with how you experience yourself and how you want others to relate to you as? So it's just that I this fits me. Having a penis fits me. Having the body traits that fits me, and this is how I want you to experience me as. So that's my gender body experience. I don't think a 5-year-old is going to know that necessarily, but they might,
Mm-hmm.
because again, I think gender body dysphoria, gender body incongruence is also from birth, gets developed. So, 8-year-olds start going, oh my gosh, is that what daddy looks like? I don't want to look like that. That's not how I see myself. So I
Mm-hmm.
do think those who are dealing with gender body dysphoria, which I like to call gender body aversion, are going to also start realizing, oh, I don't want that. I can't look at that. I don't fit there. That's gender body experience.
Okay. So how did you differentiate that from biological sex identity?
Well, biological sex is just the natural traits that it's assigned at birth, but that's not necessarily what's the full story. So it's chromosomes, it's reproductive anatomy, it's hormones, it's something else. If I remember right, the collection of what biological sex is.
Mm-hmm.
Those biological sex traits are going to cause things to happen in my body. For people born with intersex variations, that's not always the case. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
love about the complexity of all this. So you think about biological sex. That's why I think it's when you go to a medical provider, they need to know your biological sex, because they need to know how to treat you with the hormones that you have, or with the
Mm-hmm.
reproductive anatomy that you have, the traits that you have. So that's biological sex. Gender body experience would be, what body traits fit you and don't fit you. There's gender social identity, which is, what group do you identify with? Well, I don't necessarily identify with men, even though I look like a man. Maybe I don't identify with a boy, but I know that I fit most with guys. So, or women or girls or non-binary people are going to say, I just don't fit in these categories. But I think people sometimes get understood. They think, well, that's John Wayne. I don't look like John Wayne, or I don't act like my masculine father, so I must, or typical male father, so I must not be a man. I think that kind of categorizing gets confusing when we start thinking about what a real man is, a real woman is. But gender label would be, again, what group do you identify with, that you fit with? And that's why I think so that's gender label. Gender role, it's a gender role orientation. It's meaning what I'm naturally born with, that what's my degree of fluidity of what are the masculine and feminine traits based on my culture I like to do. Do I like to nurture? Do I like to lead? Do I like to follow? Do I like to caretake? Am I empathizer, or do I like systems? Do I like things, or do I like people? That's a gender role orientation. And people are either born with a very restricted one or a big one. And then sexual orientation is kind of the same thing, at this range of attractions to men and women, or to no one, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that kind of sexual orientation, romantic orientation, gender body experience, gender role orientation, I think those are things that we cannot change. And I think hands off there, let's help people figure out how to live best with that. And that's where we get to behaviors and then identity.
So say that again, the things that you believe cannot change are gender body.
Well, so gender body experience,
Okay.
gender role orientation,
Okay.
and sexual orientation. Again, sexual orientation has degrees of fluidity, attraction, aversion, and then romantic orientation. And I think people are either born with, or they're not born with, a sexual attraction fluidity. I don't have any fluidity. No matter how much I'm going to hang out with women and have sex with them, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. I'm going to be averse to it. But some people can. So again, the people are born with a gender fluidity. I have, I think, some fluidity in my masculine and feminine traits. That's what I have some range of. I can do certain things and not do certain things. So that's the sort of thing I think people would kind of accept instead of keep denying the reality of these naturally born traits.
Yeah, this might be a topic for a subsequent discussion, or to drill down a little bit deeper and maybe present some visuals that might help track a little bit more and understand a little bit more. So
Yes, it's a complex issue.
Maybe Nafis and Xander are tracking this better than I am.
What are you not tracking? Can I just, if I can clarify?
Yeah, I just haven't. I just like biological sex and gender body experience. I haven't quite differentiated that in my mind.
Because they are the same. And
Sure.
they're the same for you. That's the good news. But for a small minority of the population,
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm curious.
in their head, they experience themselves having body traits that are different than what they were born with.
So what's the difference between gender dysphoria?
That's gender dysphoria. But I think gender dysphoria has gender role dysphoria and gender body dysphoria have been confused into one.
Okay. All right.
And that's what Xander's been concerned about, people transitioning and detraining.
Right. And so that's where I get the role in the body dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious. I still haven't understood gender, body, and biological sex. In my mind, those are similar. Or
yes, because you're cisgender. You're cisgender.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to understand.
You're the majority, but a minority of people, whether we like it or not, whether people like the bathrooms things or not, a majority of people that for them treatment is to have the body that fits in their mind. So it's not an identity thing. It's actually, I think, going to the bathroom that fits you is actually medical treatment. Because again, it's averse to do something that doesn't fit your gender body experience.
It makes sense to me though that when it's just the water you're swimming in, you don't recognize.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was probably around 18 or, maybe I was around 17 or 18. It was one of the few times that I spent any time around my older sister because we grew up across the country from each other. She said something to me, something about sexual orientation. Of course, we weren't talking that way then, came up and I said, listen, I'm homosexual, you're heterosexual. And she's like, no, I'm not. She didn't even know what the word was, what it meant, but she was just like, no, I'm not that thing. I think there's been a lot of effort to define and describe and demonstrate and illustrate the other more than the minority versus the majority.
Yes.
That's why I find it shocking to hear that 80% of people are heterosexual. I'm like, what? Because that's not the water I've been swimming in.
That's not your experience. Yes, exactly.
Because I've been swimming in the denigrate heterosexuality, dismiss heteronormativity, challenge those kinds of things. And so it's been challenged so thoroughly in the spaces that I've been, in for like 40 plus years. Well, even, almost 50 years basically. And so it's shocking to hear what is actual.
Yeah, I think queer theory...
There's still parts of it that I believed.
Yeah, I think queer theory has been used aggressively, the same way that affirmative therapy has been used aggressively.
Yeah, that's a good place to end. Although I'd love to hear more from Nafis also.
Yes,
we were talking with... we were talking, in a sort of a different lane than we were last time, but I would love to just hear if you have some sense of you've heard everything I said, everything Lee has said, everything that Matt has said, and then taking the case into consideration. If you have a way to take us out.
Yeah, I think, this is something that we've learned while we were in school. I just put it in the chat. The genderbread person. It reminds me of that, making the biological sex and making it more nuanced, which I have here: identity, attraction, sex, and expression, all being 4 different versions, 4 different variables, not versions, as opposed to just biological sex. The question that keeps coming up, perhaps because of my own lived experience being an immigrant to the United States and having some level of international living experience, is that why, and this is a genuine question, why is it that in America, we're experiencing all of this, but in third world countries where there's little food, there's little, resources, this is just not being experienced in the same kind of way. I have a couple of hypotheses. One, which might sound malicious, but nevertheless, it's a hypothesis, is that watch Batman, which is one of my favorite movies, and Bane says victory has defeated us, and I wonder if, as Americans, as Western civilization, Europeans might be watching this and listening to this as well. Is it that we've won so much that this is now, in the effort to be a protagonist, this is our created antagonist? Another hypothesis, of course, which counterpoints the original, is that perhaps in the hierarchy of needs, we can only have these conversations once basic needs are met. And once basic needs are met, we really understand how much nuance there is well beyond biological sex. And those are counterpoints to one another. These are hypotheses. To my knowledge, we don't have information saying this is the right thing or that's the right thing. But in the interest of viewpoint diversity, I think it's important for us, the four of us, but also for our listeners and our viewers to consider all these different hypotheses without thinking this is what I want to prove myself right on. Consider opposing viewpoints and research those viewpoints and try and understand why someone might think differently from you.
Exactly.
Well, and just returning just briefly to the, understanding the water that you swim in, not having to apologize for that water, just recognizing, acknowledging it, that it's there, acknowledging where you're coming from, what your premises are, what you're, having some self-awareness as a helping professional, I think does make a difference. And when we try to impose something onto the people that we're working with, that gets pretty messy. And or when we try to impose turning against something within ourselves or turning against each other, that's where I think the Supreme Court, I appreciate what they've done in many ways, and that they have recognized that the state, it's not appropriate for them to enter the therapy room and to determine which goals, identities, or other things need to be our priorities. And so, but at the same time, being careful. And Lee, I really appreciate the cautions, the way that you outlined what conversion therapy, what good therapy looks like, as well as helping us identify what it is and when it's very perilous. So thank you for doing that. That was excellent. I think we've got some other discussions to be had, but that's the time that we have for today. So thank you very much, and we appreciate everyone joining us for Pro Social Workers. Lee, any final words? We'll give you the opportunity to make a final word if you'd like.
Keep thinking in assertive ways. Love and power. Assertiveness is love, being loving and powerful at the same time. Think about yourself and think about the other person, and there you'll be more effective.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Pro Social Workers podcast. We're grateful to our guests for sharing their insights, and to you, our listeners, for being part of this journey. If you'd like to earn continuing education credits, don't forget to visit our website at prosocialworkers.com, where you can register, pay a fee, complete a course evaluation, and take a quick quiz. We look forward to having you with us next time as we continue to explore how we can put the social back into social work.